Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining on time and even a few minutes early. We're going to get started at 11:02. We'll give people a few minutes to join.
There's nothing wrong with your computer. We're just not talking for a minute, just in case you're frantically worried that your audio is not working. Everyone's deep in thought about how they will participate in the upcoming panel. You can judge us by our hairdos and our clothing. The fact that we actually are only wearing nice clothes from the waist up. I can't speak for John, but I'm actually wearing nice clothes all the way down. So
I'm not going to say it's too much information.
TMI. Yeah.
Security and privacy.
I see a lot of my ALA friends are coming online, and they all know I don't wear pants.
It's just out there already, so why
now
not?
We all know, Henry.
Yeah, it's awesome. I could give this thumbs up, right? Is that how we do this? I don't want us to do it.
And for those of you who are not here, we will record. I know they're not going to hear this, but we will record and send this to you to watch at a later time in bed with a nice cup of hot coffee or cocoa if you're from Canada.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, it's 11:02, so we are going to get going. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Kristen Koenig, and I know most, if not all of you, know Tim Birchman. He might possibly be the reason some of you joined today. Last minute, he was actually unable to attend. Everything is fine, but he does regret he's unable to participate, and he does apologize, so I wanted to share that with everybody. But we are still excited to be presenting and teaming up with our panelists to discuss incident response and what it really means for your industry. I just want to take a minute to note a couple things. At the top of your screen, there's a box with a question mark. Please use this to submit questions to our panelists. We're going to go through them at the end. And also right next to that is a smiley face. If everyone could send an emoticon along, just so we know that you can hear us and see us, that would be great. Give everyone a minute to go ahead and do that. Come on, guys. I know we're awake out there.
Yeah, there's not much we get for feedback other than those sort of quirky little thumbs up and smiley faces. So we do appreciate you send those every once in a while. Otherwise, it's like talking to an empty room with padding on the wall. Exactly.
We're here. Yeah.
So, yep. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. Feel free to send them throughout the webinar, letting us know you're still awake, still engaged. Throughout the webinar, we will also pause, run a couple polls. We really encourage you guys to participate. And after the webinar is completed, a survey is going to pop up on your screen. So we would really appreciate if you took 2 minutes out of your day to just give us some feedback on this webinar and for future ones. Now that logistics are out of the way, I'd really like to introduce our moderators. We have John Flory, Chief Information Security Officer, and Jeremy Vignaux, Vice President of Technology over here at Harbor Networks. I'll hand it off to John now.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Great job starting us off. This webinar has been something I've really been looking forward to because, the panel that we have. You know, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the panel members on, incidents and breaches, et cetera. So it's a big part of my life right now, incident response and helping customers and going out there. And, the attacks are changing, and we're going to talk about that. For a couple of years, it's just been phishing. It's going way beyond that. And that makes we need to be hyper alert. All right. And it starts with a plan. The key is having an incident response plan. If you don't have a plan, it's not going to go well. Right. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves really quickly. And I'm going to go around the horn. And I'm going to start with Darlene Hollywood. Darlene, why don't you say hello?
Hello, how is everyone today? My name's Darlene Hollywood. I'm the principal of Hollywood Agency. We are an integrated communications firm focused on, of course, making brands famous. And we do that really through promoting products directly to consumers through channels like social media, and then also by working with third-party experts like the media. But as much as we try to get positive attention for our clients, sometimes it's as important to keep them out of the spotlight. And that's where the crisis communications comes into play.
It's crucial. It's crucial. Henry Chace.
I'm Henry Chace. I'm the CIO at Burns & Levinson. I know many of the people online here. I'm lately a semi-active, but previously very active member of the Boston chapter of the ALA. So it's nice to see all these friends online. And this is a very important topic, especially in the legal vertical.
Yeah. Stephen Eyre.
Hey guys, I'm Steve. I am a corporate and transactional attorney here at Casner and Edwards in Boston. I've also got sort of my pet interest is intellectual property and data security. So I work on that for the firm as well.
Excellent. And now my co-presenter, Jeremy Vignaux.
Yes, thank you, John. So my name is Jeremy Vignaux. I'm the VP of Technology at Harbor Networks, and I'm here as sort of the sidekick for John to keep people entertained, and obviously to provide some sort of real world examples and anecdotes and all kinds of things, specifically today about incidents response and planning and so forth. So feel free to throw out all the questions. I'll probably start the Q&A at the end and do some other stuff to try to keep us awake. So thanks for joining.
Excellent. Okay. So, Henry, we're going to start with you. And I'd really like all the panelists to chime in on this from both your own perspective in your own business and then what you're seeing out there. Do you have an incident response plan? That's my question. Okay.
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, we do. For anybody in legal, most of us all know that 10 or more years ago, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts issued a directive called Regulation 17, which requires all businesses that service and work with residents of the Commonwealth to have a privacy plan to protect personal information. And it also requires a written incident security plan and a WISP. And we have that. And that WISP is required to outline the chain of command and the officers in charge of security in the firm, so that you can have that you have a whole procedure to follow in the event of an incident. So that's pretty explicit. The regulation is very clear about how it works. Firms have done it differently, but it's mainly you need to have senior attorneys and senior staff aware of reporting incidents and then to deal with how to report it to clients if necessary and also to the Commonwealth.
Yeah. So Henry, was it the regulation that drove it? Is that why you created the plan? Was that the original?
Well, yeah. So mainly because in my experience in legal, and I've been in legal technology for about 30 years, lawyers always think they're above the law. So not all of them. I'm sure Stephen doesn't, but there's a certain amount of yes. There's a certain amount of it's for them, not me, sort of thing, and also anything that gets in the way of serving clients and for productivity is also seen sometimes as not necessary. But as the breaches became much more egregious, especially with the TJ Maxx and so on and so forth, a number of years ago, where thousands of credit cards information and Social Security information and stuff were breached, it became really obvious that some procedure had to be done. And law firms have a lot of personal information. We pretend like it's no big deal, but we do tax information. We do, divorce and family law here at Burns and Levinson. So we're preparing people's income taxes. We're doing all sorts of personal information. We have HIPAA regulations for medical conditions and so forth. And almost everything we do in some case contains something that relates to personal information of our clients and our own employees. So it's necessary to definitely have something.
It's so scary because I was talking about the tax changing and they're taking our data and then they're holding us hostage with it. It's extortion. It's beyond pay us and we're going to allow you to work and be productive. We're right now dealing with, and Darlene's going next, and I'm working, right, with Darlene on several breaches that you haven't heard about. So that's a good thing from that perspective. But the bad thing is what these people are trying to do. And it's scary because they're taking the info first, and then they go after your backups, and then they go after your systems. So by the time people are realizing that they're hit and they have ransomware, their customer information, their personal information, all the information basically in their business, these hackers have. And now they're saying, yeah, if you want to work, we could figure that out. But we're going to go to every outlet in the media, and we're going to leak your customer information, etc. It's scary. It's not a fun situation. So, Darlene, first of all, do you have a plan? Second of all, what are you seeing out there? Because you're out there with these people that have plans, don't have plans. What's going on?
I mean, personally, do I have a plan with my agency? Absolutely, because I think everybody needs a plan. What we find with a lot of our clients is operationally they have plans in place, but they don't have communication plans. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a client say to me, there's nothing that we could have done in advance to prepare us for this. And I don't agree with that at all, because it's almost like when you go on an interview for a job, like the more you interview, the better you're prepared to like take that question that comes out of left field.
Right.
So, we're always trying to convince people that they have to have something in place in advance, but it's just not often, unfortunately, at the forefront of priorities for businesses.
And we talk about this all the time, where in information technology and in technology in general, we try to teach people to plan in advance for all of the outcomes, so that if one of them surprises you, you don't have to figure out what to do. You just have to execute what you've already figured out. And that crisis event obviously clouds people's thinking. It makes people excited, makes people nervous. So, maybe your plan doesn't need to be laminated and posted in the kitchen, but it needs to actually have been written. It needs to have been distributed. It needs to have been rehearsed, so that it's not the first time you do this. I mean, we watched a rocket launch a couple months ago, and the level of checklists and back and forth was extraordinary. They're still using checklists because you have to follow a plan, because there's just too many variables, there's too much emotion and so forth. So, at the very least, having a plan, writing it down, even if it's not complete, it's obviously something you can modify over time. So, I mean, Henry, you talked about 10 years ago. I would imagine your incident response plan has changed at least 10 times, probably twice that, as you reviewed it over the years and so forth. So it has to be a living document, but you have to have something so that you're not thinking on the fly, you're executing rather than thinking on the fly. So obviously some good points there.
Really good points. And Darlene, before we move on from you, what's the difference in feel from when people have a plan and don't have a plan?
It's the level of chaos you can expect. And, the plans that we prepare for clients are extremely detail oriented. There's a lot of information in them. However, I think what's most important in anything like this is having like a really easy to follow appendix, so that people can just get to the information that they need to right away, whether that's the communications tree on who to call first. I mean, you don't want to be fumbling for the telephone number for the management office of which you rent an office from if an employee gets a threat and you don't know how to get to these people. Like, everything has to be available at your fingertips, because crises move in real time very quickly.
That's a great answer. And, we just dealt with somebody as an example that they went to get Bitcoin because they had to pay the ransom. That's where they were at. There was no way around it. We never recommend you paying the ransom, but this particular client was in that position. And when they went to the ransomware negotiators to get the provision the Bitcoin, that took them 3 times, because the first 2 agencies that they went to were not taking new clients. They were too busy at the time. And that's straight up. It took them 3 people. It was really eye-opening to me. Stephen, weigh in.
As Henry said, as a Massachusetts-based serving Massachusetts clients law firm, we of course have a written information security program that outlines our response strategy. I would note, as sort of the lawyer representative here, for all the sins of lawyers. I'd say make sure, part of the requirement of a WISP is that it be distributed to everybody. It should be distributed as part of your onboarding. People should sign an acknowledgement saying they received it. There are required regular updates to re-notify people of the WISP, but making sure that everyone really sort of has a sense of what's included there, down to paralegals and admins. There can be a data breach as simply as someone, leaving their iPhone that isn't encrypted and is unlocked, in a cab. That can be a data breach, and that might be something that people don't think about. And if a paralegal leaves their phone in a cab and it's unsecured, that might be something they might not even think to sort of report up the chain. And so making sure not just that you have it in place, that people, actually read it. They don't just sign the acknowledgement saying they read it, and people, like Jeremy said, understand it's a living document. It's something that they've got to interact with.
Yeah, and Jeremy's going to weigh in next on this particular topic, but two things come to mind with what you're saying. The first is you have to limit the access, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Henry.
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
Being the IT person, you want to make sure that it's a written information security plan, because if you're hacked and your system's down,
you can't get to the file. Exactly.
You can't get to the file, which has all this really critical information. So more than one person should have it. It should exist as a written, that's why it's called a written information security plan. I have found to grin in the past as I've been searching for critical instructions of how to rebuild or bring back a server, and all those instructions were online.
Right.
So
maybe it should be laminated and posted in the kitchen, like I said. Yeah.
It's not a bad idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, it should definitely be in a fireproof safe, right? And the second thing, before I move on to Jeremy, is from a governance perspective. I love how you said get everybody involved. When we look at organizations, 70% of their risk is outside of IT. Yeah, it's generally falling on IT. So we really need to understand where our risk is, who owns our risk, then what measurements, responsibilities, and oversight are we going to have as an organization, not as an IT department with technology. Technology gets beat. Okay, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. But Jeremy, weigh in on our incident response plan.
Yeah. So while I'm weighing in here, I'm gonna poll the audience here, because I think I'd like people to at least say, whether they have one or whether they're thinking about this. This will help us and maybe make you think about the things a little bit more seriously. We're obviously concentrating on cybersecurity incident response plans, but many firms have response plans that revolve around disasters and power outages and plagues and locusts, whatever. I think that you could probably use the breadth of the definition of an incident to include other departments in your company, whether it's HR or operations and things like that, whether or not you have an incident response plan to deal with a potential fire. Maybe there is a restaurant in your building and they might have a fire and you won't be allowed in your building. That's a big incident. That's something akin to that. So you may be able to use that breadth of the potential size of a number of incidents and definitions to involve a larger group of people, instead of it potentially just being dumped on information technology because it's cybersecurity. Now, we'll obviously go more into that today and how that is, but that's kind of how we approach it in our firm. Is we sort of broaden the definition of incidents to include cybersecurity as well as physical or storm related things, and it brings more people to the table to join in and participate.
And it's October, right? October 1, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And, we're going through our refresh right now. You have to practice it, and people need to know their roles, right? So we're actually doing that right now. I'm gonna go to you, Steve, and from a legal perspective, how do we know if it's a breach? And then what are our responsibilities from a reporting perspective if it is a breach?
Sure. So I mean, with respect to sort of what constitutes a breach, there are, normative definitions, which I think probably a member of the public would consider any of their information that sort of gets released or there's unauthorized access to would be considered a breach. But from a legal perspective, it's generally going to be a unauthorized access or unauthorized acquisition of personal information. And so this is my lawyerly caveat that this is all extremely state specific. And so as a lawyer who does data privacy, I'm a big lover of 50 state surveys and 50 state charts that show the definition for personal information for every single state. They're all slightly different. Massachusetts is sort of indicative of a larger trend, which is that it is sort of generally information that you would think of as being capable of being used to steal your identity. So it's going to be identifying information like your name, and then that's going to be coupled with either financial account number, social security number, in some states, driver's license number will qualify. But it's that identifying information is generally going to be what constitutes personal information. And I think, Henry had noted, law firms may also deal with, protected health information under HIPAA, the HIPAA High Tech Acts. If you work with certain financial, organizations and do work there may be additional regulations as far as what constitutes protected information under those statutes. And so it's important to, I think we've discussed it a bit and probably will more, but having a good sense of what kind of data you're holding on to as an organization, so you can figure out, what jurisdictions you might have liability in and what statutes you need to follow. But so again, a data breach will be sort of unauthorized access or unauthorized acquisition of this personal information. And it's important to note that a lot of state statutes will exempt out if that data has been sort of lost, but it's encrypted. So in Massachusetts, as long as the data is encrypted and it's not also the key to the encryption is not released at the same time, then that doesn't constitute a data breach. In some jurisdictions, you're going to have to perform that analysis and then report to the AG anyways that you've done that analysis and that you don't think that anything that there was an actual data breach. But otherwise, in a lot of jurisdictions, as long as the data was encrypted, then that's not going to be a data breach that's reportable. So this is a good plug for all mobile devices. All laptops should have full disk encryption on them if they don't already. And so there's a bunch of different tools out there. Macs have File Vault built in. Everybody use full disk encryption on everything. It'll save you a lot of headaches for when that phone or that laptop gets left in a car or a cab or something. So with regards to reporting requirements, there are a few different constituencies you might have to report to. One is going to be sort of the consumers themselves. And so you're going to have to figure out, again, in line with that data audit, whose information was jeopardized, where are they located, how do you contact them? And in most situations, you're going to end up having to sort of contact them by physical mail. There are digital notifications that are allowed, but in most cases, you're going to have had sort of pre-existing authorization to make communications like that digitally. And so usually you're going to end up having to sort of mail stuff out to individual consumers that are affected. In most states, you're going to have to also notify the Attorney General's office, or there may be sort of a separate agency, a consumer protection agency that deals with this that you're going to have to notify. And then those offices so in Massachusetts, you notify the AG's office, also the Department of Consumer Affairs, and then they can come back and tell you, okay, and you've also got to notify X, Y, and Z agencies because we think that this may implicate sort of their area of expertise. So those are the sort of notification requirements. And again, one of the big parts of your incident response plan should be, how are you going to figure out, whose data has been accessed and what jurisdictions you're going to have to comply with statutorily?
I'm a huge believer in having legal involved on the front end of a security plan. So often it's at a reaction. You gave us the best technical. The lawyer gives us the best technical advice we've got today, which is incredible advice.
Crypt your laptops and mobiles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they get it, it's garbage and it's not usable. So I'm just going to add backed up to that.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're encrypted and you're backed up, that's very
Mhm.
powerful. And that's great. That's awesome. Henry, I'm going to go to you. And we talked about it a little bit before, but is IR planning just an IT department issue? And who are you getting involved? Who should you get involved?
Well, Stephen just laid it out perfectly, and too bad they already have a really, really great IT person at his firm, whom I know, because I would love that level of advocacy. We do have it here, but yes, it sometimes, and used to, especially more in the past, was used in an IT function, and it's not, because the regulations are legal regulations and requirements, and as Stephen pointed out, they differ from state to state and from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I'm not a lawyer, and I've learned a lot about what I need to know here, but I'm not the expert. So I've likened it when talking with attorneys about the planning here is that I can give you advice about what is forensically correct to do when you're looking for evidence, let's say, in a hard drive or whatever, but I don't have the background and knowledge to understand what a litigation use of that is going to be. So that becomes one of those sorts of important questions where lawyers need to be involved. And also, as the owners of the firm, the equity partners need to also have a stake in this, because it has a direct impact on their ability to continue practice. Their firm is at stake because some of these fines are quite substantial, and the regulations, although they vary, are fairly explicit about penalties and what actually is a breach. So I'm not in a position to say, oh, I think we have a breach here, and it needs to go up the chain and immediately get the legal management of the firm involved to make the decisions about how to proceed. I provide the tools and the information, but I don't do the lawyering, and I'm not the right person to interpret the law. So, I haven't been trained in the law, and I'm not always up to date on what all the latest things are, because that's not what my role is.
Right.
So, the whole thing to put this off as an IT thing is very short-sighted, and it's not going to bring you where you need to be overall. I mean, IT will do the best they can. And I have a quick little tidbit here in that, security has been very important, and I've been a big advocate of security. But when we were audited a number of years ago by a client, a very important client, the auditors, when they came into the firm and they met with me and people in my department, in the IT department, and they said, listen, we do this with a lot of law firms that represent us. So we're not going to ask the lawyers what they think they should be doing. We're going to ask you, because we know that you want to do the right thing. So you just tell us what it is you think your firm should be doing, and we'll put that in our letter for the recommendation for the firm. So I was like, honestly, in a candy store, I was like, oh, two-factor authentication and password policies and, third-party, penetration studies. And it's like the sort of thing I couldn't talk fast enough to get, they're scribbling down all this information. And sure enough, when the audit was completed, that information was submitted in a letter to the partner who represented the client. And suddenly, we had a purpose. Everything was put into place. And they also, at my request, gave us a timeline. Well, we know something's going to take 3 months. We know something's going to take 6 months. At the end of this period of time, we will come back. So I would be saying to the partners, they're coming back.
Right.
And they'd be like, yeah, we know. And I was like, no, they are. They're really coming back. They're coming back. So it was a great thing, and it was just that, it can be a hit to revenue in terms of, in a cash-based business that's driven by cash. That's one factor. It's another thing. It can be inconvenient. Two-factor authentication, is like, oh, another step to get online. But the encryption, well, why is my computer so slow? It's like, we're protecting you. So those have been really good things, but it doesn't have anything to do with, IT has no jurisdiction on this. I'd liken my job to being Queen Elizabeth of England, and then I could advise, I can warn, I wave and say,
Can you do the wave correctly? Yeah, important.
but I can't make a partner do something, an owner of the firm do something that they don't want to do. It has to come from a client or another partner.
Right.
So
And that's great, Henry. And it's happening, right? Where our clients are driving us, right? And third parties are asking us and sending us questionnaires and insurance, and it's starting to hit all over the place. So that's a really great point. And I really like what you did from a technology perspective. If you can't get buy-in, and a lot of times you can, I would just, if you're an administrator, if you're a stakeholder, if you're somebody that's on the hook, document it. Document, because when there's a breach, nobody remembers anything. Okay.
Hey, John,
can I just jump into?
No, go ahead, Darlene, because I was going to you go first.
I was just going to say, just like Henry said, I'm not a lawyer. I can't determine whether something's a breach or it's not a breach. But I think it's important to remember, we define a crisis as, and I'm reading the definition, an immediate or potential threat to a company or its operations, employees, or good standing that could lead to significant real or perceived reputational damage. And I think that that's really important to remember, because it doesn't really matter if it's real or it's not. If your customers or your employees believe that there is a threat at hand, you still have to be able to message around that. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So John, I wanted to jump in and see if you'd let me poll the audience here related to that question we did. Okay. And let us know, who is in charge of, or I should say, because in the incident response planning, there's often a security incident response team or so forth. I'm sort of interested as to who owns that in your organization. Whether it's all dumped on IT and poor Henry there. And maybe this is a quick plug for me to say that I think we require those fancy Herman Miller chairs to be part of our security platform. So I think that should be part of. Can I tell one of our clients that that's a requirement to sign up? Maybe not. All right. Thanks very much. Almost Excellent. Everybody there. Yeah. Awesome.
Yes, that's great. So what are some of the key components? And Darlene, we'll stay on you, and then we'll go to Jeremy from a technical perspective. From your perspective, and then we'll go from a legal perspective and all the way around. But from your perspective, what are some key components to a crisis communication part of an IR plan?
Well, in the plan itself, I think the most important part is the assignment of roles and understanding who's going to do what. So we always make sure, first and foremost, that we have an activation team. And that team's role or their job is to actually decide, yes, this is a crisis situation. So for a lot of clients, we set up a number of qualifying questions. And they could be something like, is the health, safety, or privacy of a customer or employee at risk? Or, is the organization going to be unable to deliver a product or a service? Or maybe was that executive or an employee negligent, or is he being charged with a crime? And if you can answer yes to any of these qualifying questions, then at that point, the activation team would kick it over to a response team. And the response team is the one that is responsible for actually executing the plan. So depending on what kind of business that you're in, it might include a CEO, it could include somebody from operations or legal, maybe somebody from R&D or quality, but you really need to limit the number of people, because everyone knows if there are too many chefs in the kitchen, that's when things don't happen as they should. So we try to keep those teams tight. And then I think I mentioned it before, you really need to have a good fleshed out communications tree so that people can be notified of the situation as they need to be. Then from our perspective, a lot of times we're dealing with the media management piece of it, and you need protocols in place for who can speak to the media and what they can actually say. You'll need social policies in place in terms of how customer service teams are going to react to inquiries and that kind of thing. And again, we suggest not only do you have a backup person for each person responsible for one of these roles, but there should be a backup for the backup. because
Yeah.
you don't want to be trying to flounder finding somebody to do stuff at the last minute. Again, as I said, I think these plans need to be really detailed but easily accessed, and information that's at hand can be used seamlessly.
Yeah, internal scares me, right? Because who knows their Twitter and all this stuff. Jeremy, weigh in from a technical perspective, key components.
Well, first, I'm going to say that I find it very handy to schedule my vacations during all security events. I find that works the best for me. I'm not sure about the company, but that is the way I do that too. If we're concentrating on cybersecurity, the more you know about what's happening, obviously the better. I mean, a lot of firms have they've got firewalls, they've got antivirus, they've got encryption in their laptops and so forth. There are a lot of sort of technology trucks driving down the highway with nobody driving them. So keeping eyes on these things is technologically, I think, probably the most important of all of these two. It's useless to have something that's monitoring if no one's actually looking at the logs or the monitors. And I think that's probably been one of the hardest technological hurdles to get over for a lot of companies and firms, is to spend all of this money on technology and parts, but not spend the money on the process to monitor them. And so that's really where we are now, and the maturity of this is don't just assume that because you have an insurance plan that's enough. You need to have somebody who's reading it. You need to have somebody who's modifying it. You need to have somebody who's actually at the steering wheel, making sure that the temperature gauge is not going over, that kind of stuff. So that's probably, in a broad sense, the biggest challenge on the IT side. Now, you can tell everybody that they need to encrypt their mobile phone, or you could force and audit and test to make sure. And then obviously, then you're in a better place. Or as Stephen had mentioned, the awareness of your policies is key, because if somebody says, oh yeah, 2 weeks ago I lost my laptops, that's a problem. They need to know, they need to tell you that, they're not going to get in trouble. They'll actually get in more trouble. It's like you're a kid again. You'll get more in trouble if you lie about what you did than if you just tell me right away. I mean, people still need to be reminded of that. Even today, it's really quite funny, sad but funny.
Henry, I'm going to you and then Stephen, but that's excellent. And from a fraud perspective, and there's a lot of it going on, 60% of fraud is still see something, say something. With all the detection we have and everything going on, it's still somebody sees something. So do you have an anonymous way to report if somebody sees something in your organization? That's a very inexpensive way to get a lot of value. Create it. Give them an anonymous way. If they see something a little bit weird, to report on it. And Jeremy, that oversight is huge. We're incident responders. We go out when people get hit, and they're paying a third party or employee to do things like patching. We get out there, it's not done. How do you know it's being done? What's the oversight? Is it the guy that's the stakeholder that put his name on the line to bring him in? Is that your oversight? You have to have metrics. They have to be objective. You have to have a committee or some type of an office. Third parties are rampant. And the risk, we'll have another webinar on third parties, right? But Henry, weigh in from your perspective.
Well, I just want to give a shout out to my ALA friends that are online here, and I see who they are. It's, one of the hard things is I'm not necessarily a very small firm. I'm a mid-sized firm. We have about 135 attorneys. But the education is everything. Stephen was absolutely right. You have to make sure this is in front of people, because the threats change and they're different, and people need to be aware and they need to be informed. And it's not part of their job description to be constantly keeping up with threats and potential threats. And we get tons of spoofing and spam and phishing. And so educating people to be aware of what that does and what it's about will save you a lot of time and trouble. The second part is that it's not possible for me and the crew that I have on the IT group here to do all the other things we do to support the firm and also be on top of looking at every log and every incident and everything that's happening, which is why we've gone to the point of hiring a third-party company to do that for us. They're the ones who have the eyes on the glass, as Stephen put it, 24/7. I can't do that, and we can't do that. So I don't have a dedicated security officer like some big firms do, or a whole dedicated security staff. We're not at that level. So for these friends of mine from ALA who are in smaller firms, it's very worthwhile to look into third-party companies that will offer this service. And it's actually no longer kind of a luxury to do that. It's almost a necessity because it's so important to do that. I mean, I have, there's me and 6 people in the IT department, but we do everything that has to do, if it plugs in, it's our fault. So, and security is a full-time job now. So it's, so that was something that was a no-brainer for me. And of course, it was a hard sell because it's not cheap. But at the same time, it met the qualifications of the clients who were looking at us and asking for certain metrics of security, that we could go to them and say, we have this service and here's what it does. Does this meet your requirements? And we were able to get a sign off on that part. So that is in itself a huge relief.
And Henry, no one is safe, right? We're all hackable, but from a due diligence, a defensible, and doing the right thing perspective, you can go to bed at night. You can actually sleep while these criminals aren't, knowing that you have these people watching your network, because what's happening is they're getting in and we don't know, and they're taking all of our information. So having an Arctic Wolf or a monitoring service does not mean that they're not going to get in. But if they get in, we're going to be able to know it, and we're going to be able to shut it down and contain it. So you might rebuild a computer instead of being worried about your reputation, right? So it's a huge, huge thing. Stephen, did you go yet? Okay. So what I want. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Let's hear.
So this isn't directly on point, but this is something that occurred to me I think is worth noting, which is that we're obviously focused on digital sort of breaches and incident response here. That's sort of the maybe lower likelihood but higher consequence incident, because it's probably access to all of the data in your firm. The maybe much more likely but somewhat lower consequence data breach that you're going to run into is just the physical weak link in the chain, the lawyers in your firm who stop at Dunkin' Donuts on the way to court one morning and they leave the car unlocked and a case file gets stolen or something like that. That's also a data breach. And so as you're putting together your plans, make sure that, you don't sort of miss the maybe more likely, incident, and don't educate people on sort of basic physical safeguards and security practices. That's just sort of something that occurred to me that, is maybe the more likely incident rather than, a hacker with a 0-day breach comes in and takes over your system. So, but with regards to sort of the incident response plan, what I like to see on it from the lawyer's perspective, if a client tells me they've had an incident, what I want to be able to do is sort of run to the statutes and the regs and say, and figure out exactly what has to be done if that hasn't been done already. And the input that I need for that is I need to know how many people were affected, where they were located, and what type of data was implicated. And so having in your plan a way to proactively, again, sort of audit that kind of information so that you can tell whoever you're working with on the incident response, so you can get your arms around what the scope of the problem is, so you can go out and deal with it. That's the biggest thing for me.
That's great. And
John, can I run a?
Yeah, go.
I was going to say, while you ask your question, Henry, I just want to run another quick poll. You can talk right over on the top of this. I just want to know what, if anything, people have in place for detecting, because it's kind of in the theme of what we were talking about. But while you're answering that, Henry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this whole thing that Stephen brought up also is where Darlene meets the sweet spot here, because she's going to be informing people of what, as Stephen just pointed out, one of the things that's so important is that a breach isn't just a technology thing, which is why it's not an IT thing. I mean, people leave stuff lying around all the time. And before COVID even, when we moved into our new space last July, thank God we tightened it up so we had badges to get into the personal space, because we don't want clients wandering around inside the firm. But before, we used to let them wander around inside the firm. It was like, oh, I need to use the ladies' room. The conference room is down the hall. You're going to walk right through the Trust and Estates department and see all these wills lying around on the drawers. The boxes for the clients were labeled, the Chace file, Chace versus Chace, the divorce and stuff like that. You don't know who people know and what people know. So we've gradually been, now the file cabinets don't have a case name on them. They're assigned a number. But this was all, learning process. But Darlene is going to be able to be the person to say, this is not just a technology thing. This is a people thing. And that is so important because lots of these sorts of things have nothing to do with me. If someone calls me and says, oh, Karen left, she's on her way to court and she left her file at Dunkin' Donuts. It's like, what do you want me to do about it? It's like, I can go to Dunkin' Donuts and look for it, but I mean, is that what I do? I don't know. I'm happy to do it. But so that's really important. It's not an IT thing, just an IT thing.
You're absolutely right on the head. And it's culture, people, process, technology. Okay, CPPT. Right. I was in a bar in Rochester 3 years ago, and we offered $500 if people would give us their work credentials. And 3 people gave them to us. And we had the computer right there to make sure it worked. So just keep that in mind. And I thought afterwards, that's too much money. I didn't need to give that much money. And secondly, our people's credentials are everywhere. They're fantasy football. They just use your credentials and they can't remember another password. So just keep that in mind from a policy reiteration perspective. Don't use your credentials, people. That's for work. That's not for outside of work because they're flying everywhere and that's bad and scary, these mailbox takeovers, right, etc.
Use password managers, please.
Yeah. So John, I want to sort of shift the scare tactics to our audience here for a second and try to turn something positive here. Does anyone, and sort of throwing out to the panel, anyone who feels like answering here, does anybody see that having a good incident response plan and a security program, does anyone think that that's a competitive advantage in their industry? And whether or not, your firm has a better reputation because of your plan, potentially? Is there any positive upside to that?
I have an answer. First. Go ahead.
I'll go quick. So I think absolutely. I work with a lot of technology companies or early stage companies. It definitely depends on the client who's going to value it. But I have definitely been, I think lawyers are really used to being like, here's our fee agreement. You're going to sign it. You're not going to make any changes. And I think more and more clients are handing us back their documents for what policies they want their firm to adhere to. And so I think for those kinds of clients, it's absolutely a competitive advantage.
Okay. That's good news for some people who, because in the general sense, part of this is it's a plan that people need to work on. So, one of the challenges sometimes is how do you get the participants in your firm to be not loathing in this process? What can we give them a win? Can we make them feel good about it? Can we make them feel better that you've planned in advance? Does anyone have any sort of, suggestions about how to encourage folks and the players in this to be more interested in this, either positively or otherwise, other than just scaring them and that kind of thing?
I would just say, unfortunately, it's really hard to get over that hurdle in terms of the communications plan because really people just don't believe that it's going to happen to them. I think that's the first thing. But I was going to say to the first part of the question, the situations that we find that really blow up and get out of control are always those in which there's a lag in response time. So the more time that goes by in which nothing is said, that's generally when things escalate. And oftentimes you don't have to have all the answers. All you have to be able to say to your community or your customers or your partners is, we're investigating it. We know something's happened. We're on it. And that's it. But so often we see that there's just a, reluctancy to communicate.
Right on. That's in all business. That's in every facet of business. Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
I was just going to say, no one likes bad news. And again, as Steve pointed out, you need to incentivize your employees to admit when they've made a mistake. Or I think Jeremy pointed that out, but just, to make sure that they understand they're part of the team and they're part of the success, and that they don't like, oh, gee, I sent all this private personal information to a client in an email without encrypting it, without using all the different tools that we've made available at their fingertips to just send things encrypted and password protected or whatever. And then they don't want to self-report because the attorney that they're working for who represents the client is going to, they're going to get in trouble. And it's like, no, let's get in trouble. It's fine because they're happy that you let them know right away so that we can communicate with the client. And it's an extra, I always tell people, we're providing an extra service for our clients by offering them free advice not to use Dropbox. So when you have a client who's insisting on using Dropbox, give them free legal advice. You're not going to charge them. You're going to say, gee, we have all these other ways to get this to you safely. So I don't want to have you send your tax information to me in a Dropbox file. And look, you've just done them a huge favor. You've given them free advice. And then you've also said, we have all these other ways you can communicate personal and private information to us. So please don't risk your client. Let your client know how lucky they are that Burns and Levinson is representing them and points this out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do with our staff is I congratulate them and thank them when they see something and say something. So when someone sends me an email or says, hey, I got this weird thing, and they ask me about it, I always say, good job. Thank you for bugging me, because you need to give people positive feedback so that they will tell you when they leave their laptop in a taxi cab, or that they will tell you. So positive feedback is another incentive for people to say, great, good. This is good that you noticed this. This is good that you asked. This is good that you wondered, whatever. So don't be afraid to give people good feedback, because we are still kids inside, and we need to be told that that was a good thing to do. So, if somebody executes on a policy, you want to make sure that they're potentially called out, and maybe even sent out in an email and say, somebody did something great. They didn't pick up that USB stick, or they picked up that USB stick that they found in the parking lot, and they gave it to the IT staff and said, I found this out in the parking lot. Something's going on, or whatever. So don't be afraid to give people positive feedback. Do you have an example?
Well, no, some of the folks that are online with us, our audience, are also people using outsourced IT services. And to make sure that, I'm sure they have done this, but to make sure that in your outsourced agreement with the people who are managing your IT, that there's something in there to make sure you give it to Stephen or to whoever your counsel is that way, so they can read it to make sure you're covered for notification, that those third parties are required and they're using something to make sure they're protecting your data 24/7. So don't just assume that they have that, because that's a really important thing, because you make sure they have some liability in this to protect your information.
Great point.
And strong indemnification provisions.
Yeah. As we migrate to the cloud, it's about the contract. So just keep that in mind. Cloud is, we're taking our applications, we're putting them somewhere else. So that's where we really have to hone in on the SLAs, Henry. It's a great point. So on our third-party managed service provider, and as we migrate to the cloud, contract's key. Actually, Stephen, just real quick, when should a lawyer be involved in a security program?
I mean, up front, if I can tell you up front what data points I'm going to need to respond, then you can craft your security program better to have that information up front and to be collecting that and monitoring it. So, that's an easy one, John. Immediately.
Yes. Oh, lawyers are friends, not food. So they're
Yes, Henry.
Call your lawyer early and often. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Before we came to questions, I just wanted everybody to give one piece of advice. Just if you could just say, hey, if I had to give you one piece of advice, and there's no silver bullet, there's no magic bullet. Okay, this is a whole layered approach. What would it be? I'll start with Jeremy, so everybody else has a second to think. Go, Jeremy.
Quick piece of advice would be to don't assume that you're fully covered ever.
Right.
It's
Great.
always an ongoing process. You always have to stay at pace with the people who are working against you.
Right. Radar detector. Steve.
I just say make sure everyone is sort of always thinking about security, whether it's in line with a policy or anything else. Making sure that security is sort of top of mind for everyone.
Yeah, that's really good. Culture, people, process, technology. Darlene.
Prepare your spokespeople and make sure you've identified them and make sure that everybody else knows they are not a spokesperson.
Yes, your focus is great because it's so important, and I do believe it is overlooked. So that's awesome, Henry.
Well, it's don't assume someone else is doing it. It's part of your job description, and it doesn't mean that you have to make this a 24/7 thing, but make sure you know what your plan is. Make sure, as Darlene said, who your spokespeople are. Make sure you have a trajectory and check that often. But it doesn't need to take all of your time, but make sure you have all the things in place and then review them. I mean, so many people say, oh yeah, security's all set. And you're like, no. I mean, I'm getting different phishing attempts every single day. That fortunately, I have a really good relationship with the attorneys here, and all the staff, and they send them to us IT first and say this looks strange, and we've trained them what to look for. Like when the thing says managing partner wants you to send the W-2 forms to everybody. Well, our managing partner's email address is not at gmail.com. So just look at that and know that there's junk. Don't ever make assumptions, and whenever you're in doubt, check with someone who you think might know.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm going to lead my last little bit of advice is good news, Jeremy. So I'm going to good news is we can't. I call it. I like to play offense, not defense. Let's do offense. Some of the things we talked about today. Let's encrypt. Let's know who's accessing our data. Let's have 7 by 24 by 365 eyes on glass, right? Because remember, they're taking our data. We need to find it before they do that. Let's have a crisis communications plan ahead of time. Let's have our lawyer involved so it's protected, our plan. And he has the input of all the, or she has the input of all the cases and all the clients that they're working with, right? So I'm going to multifaceted that last answer. And Jeremy, I didn't know if you wanted to finish with a question or.
I do. I actually only have one question because I want to be cognizant of people's time and make them happy too. And maybe I might direct this to you, actually, John, because you are our host. And that is, what are your feelings about what is commonly known as a tabletop exercise, and what value do you see to that with relation to response planning?
It's everything because you learn, right? If you have a response plan but you don't practice it, you're going to screw it up. You should be able to do a response plan without even having to literally go to it. I mean, just to be straight, right? But at least run through it, because every year, and we're doing it right now, every year when you run through, you learn things. It's as simple as that. And this has been a great panel. I appreciate it. And I didn't know if anyone wanted to just say a final word. My word is we're going to talk to you again. This panel is going to get together again. This is near and dear to our hearts, and we're available anytime you have a question regarding this. I don't know about the lawyer, but we are. Steve, and then anyone else who would like to just say goodbye. Yeah.
I will say thanks to everybody, and thanks to our panelists and our host, John, as well. But please, when we end this, don't just close your browser. It'll pop up with, I promise, only a couple of questions. You don't have to do anything other than answer a couple of questions in the survey. So just stick around. When we end, it'll automatically pop up, and we will thank you for some of that information to help us decide where to go for future ones and give us feedback about the use of your time. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.